Hello and welcome to the Thursday Roundtable edition of the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee, joined as always on Thursdays by Luke Wyatt and Billy Derrick. We'll talk Vanderbilt football mostly. We'll get into the mailbag. We'll talk about that bad loss to Georgia State. We'll look ahead a little bit. And back to the mailbag, we'll be taking a lot of questions today. But before we dive into football, guys, more serious subject. Jeff Jennings has got a form of cancer. I think it's out there on the internet. Just a horrible situation. Send your prayers his way, and I think some donations. I think, Billy, a link was dropped on our board. And what Luke, you know a little bit about the situation. What is it exactly?
Well, it's a form of leukemia is all I know, but I will tell you this. Of course, I was at Vanderbilt when Jeff was there. Just type of person, kid he was, and now he's an adult. I never heard him say anything but yes sir and no sir to everybody. Tremendous person, tremendous family, has a child, at least one I know of. So let's keep him in our prayers for sure.
Yeah, and the
Go ahead, Billy.
I had it sent over to me from somebody who lives in East Tennessee, and he's beloved out there too because he was a great high school player out there. Jeff County, I think it was.
Right.
Came to Vanderbilt, and that's not always the case where you're from East Tennessee, you go to Vanderbilt. So obviously, keeping him in our prayers.
I remember when Jeff was the first recruit I ever covered at Vandy Sports, first commitment, and which was I still remember it. I remember talking to him. He was a running back at Jeff County and a good one and a linebacker. And I believe, man, I can't remember now if Vanderbilt was recruiting him at linebacker or running back. I think Auburn jumped in late and recruited him at linebacker. And he wound up at Vanderbilt and did play running back, was I guess their second string running back between Case and Jackson Garrison for a while and a solid back. And I just remember, I don't remember it well, but Jeff seemed like a good kid. And you just hate to see, you don't see a lot of kids come from that area of the country to Vanderbilt, and certainly probably not stick with the commitment when bigger schools start sniffing around. So, yeah, awful news. I remember him as a pretty impressive, polite kid, and let's send prayers and donations their way and hope that this has a good ending. All right, on to football. Luke, we haven't spoken to you since the Georgia State game. Just a horribly disappointing loss. Feels like Vanderbilt football is a little bit back in the where some of the optimism has certainly faded. Now, look, they are still a team that is capable of beating good teams. I think that the team that beat Georgia Tech is still in there somewhere, but it's just a missed opportunity. You heard Clark Lee talk about the lack of focus, I guess, last week, people showing up late for meetings and stuff like that. That's never something you want to hear. You just can't take anything for granted if you're Vanderbilt. I don't know if they did or didn't take this one for granted, but it sure looks and sounds that way.
Well, and I've mentioned this before, Vanderbilt has a formula to win. They have to stay, within a score the whole night. They can't turn the football over. They can't make dumb penalties. And what have they done? Especially in this. And Clark he foreshadowed this, guys. Last Tuesday, before the game, he mentioned how he didn't like the way they were, not at practice, but leading up to practice and meetings, training room. And that's the other thing. I talked about this during camp. Guys that don't show up for a meeting on time or a treatment on time or flip out on a weight room, those are the guys you can't depend on when it's Saturday. And at Vanderbilt, we're not, Watson Brown had a great quote when he first came to Vanderbilt. He said, guys, at Alabama, they can give 70% and still win a lot of football games. We give 100, we might win a lot of football games. And that's the way it is at Vanderbilt. They're not like other teams, many other teams. They have to show up and do what they do. They can't play their D game and expect to beat anybody. And that's what happened. And it's, what you can't have is have this turn into a season-long thing. After the Missouri game, you got a week off to get things straightened out, hopefully, if there is problems. But that's what it was. And look, I heard all the negativity about the final drive. Obviously we didn't deserve to win the game anyway, but yeah, that was horrible the way they scored at the end of the game. But then people forget the Virginia Tech game. We held them from the 25 and they didn't score. So why is that different? Because they were focused and doing what they're supposed to do. The Virginia Tech game and the Georgia State game, the focus was never there.
Yeah, going into the Georgia State game, it's hard for the team not to be confident, but getting overconfident and lackadaisical, like Eli Stower said, that word was, like you said, you cannot ever be lackadaisical at Vanderbilt. And they should have learned a pretty tough lesson. Now, at this point, like you said, Luke, where does this team go? You've got a trip to Columbia against a top 10 team in the country now that's staring you right in the face. Right. And so this is not, you don't have Ball State at home this week, to get right. You got to fix everything quick. And I'll be interested to see. They still got nine games left. Like that's what people need to realize. Again, it's a very disappointing loss. That loss should not have happened, but you cannot let this linger, because if it does, then that's more damage done. It's a damaging loss, but can you avoid letting that snowball is the biggest thing for me, because last year they let everything snowball. It felt like after Wake Forest, everything's just started rolling downhill. You got to try to get back to level ground now and get up to a point that you can be competitive at least, because we talked about this. And Clark has mentioned this. They can beat everybody on their schedule, I think minus Texas, Alabama. But I think they can beat everybody on their schedule, but they could also lose to all those teams, maybe minus Alcorn State. But point still stands. Vanderbilt is still in the fight. I'm very interested, Chris, to see how this team responds.
I want to ask you guys both the question, and I'm going to give a shout out to a sponsor here and let you guys think. And the preface of this question is, we all know that there was a pretty big chemistry issue with at least one high-profile player now departed last year. I know you guys are thinking of the same guy, I'm sure. And I don't think that hurt. I mean, I don't think it helped them at all last year. In fact, I know it didn't help them at all. Is this just immaturity, or are there beginnings of chemistry issues, which are hard to deal with in the portal era? I'll let you guys think about it. I'll let Luke answer first. Before that, just a reminder that basketball season is presented by the Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time from the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. With 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry, and our professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of. That's your time. Within 24 hours, pick up your nicely folded, fresh, clean laundry ready to be put away. Check out washhouseclean.com. Stop in today. Get your time back. Steve Andrews, a good buddy of mine, big Vandy fan, just a terrific person. They do great business at the Wash House, so help out the folks who help our show. All right, Luke, and now that you've had time to digest that one, I'll let you answer first.
Well, I talked to, after our game, I guess it was Tuesday of this week, I talked to one of our former coaches who I respect a whole lot, and we were talking about the game. And he said, Luke, you're in a climate now to where, and he said, obviously Clark had alluded to some issues with the way he felt, the way the team was approaching the week. He said, you're now, because of the climate we live in, you can't pass down discipline the way you used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably, and I don't know this, that's probably what it is. Kids don't react well to being told to go roll at 5 o'clock in the morning or go run stairs or whatever it may be. They don't react to it well anymore. They think, well, if they're going to treat me this way, I'll just pout and I transfer at the end of the year. And I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but I'm just saying you have to have kid gloves now. You got to walk on eggshells around your team, and that shouldn't be. That's the same thing that goes on at Alabama or wherever else. It's just that at Alabama, again, they cannot play their best and still beat people. Vanderbilt can't. So it's something you really have to work at and stay on top of. And your assistant coaches and your strength staff have to really be on the same page to make sure they're telling these kids the exact thing that they need to tell them, and not variate in what they're telling the kids and the message.
The players have the leverage. We've talked about that. I mean, there's no way around it. The player, it's an NFL style. It's an NFL model, the way some of these guys are making money. And it just is what it is. Coaches can do all they want to, and some cultures are better than others. We've talked about that. I think Vanderbilt has a strong culture, but it's still early in this season. And I think, guys, issues popped up at this point, early in the season against Georgia State that I think we talked a little bit about. That there's 53 new players. There's a lot of different personalities. There's players that are coming in from their schools that are getting paid handsomely. There's a backup quarterback that we know is getting paid handsomely. There's things going on. There's financial, capabilities of these players now, but everybody's different. And so, but I think it popped up maybe finally against Georgia State. You didn't see much of it against Virginia Tech, obviously not against Alcorn, and not in the way they played. It's just, I think that might have reared its ugly head a little bit in terms of complacency and just guys thinking, hey, I transferred over here. Maybe they don't, going on the road at Vanderbilt is never easy, and this is a game that you should win, but it's like they wanted it handed to them, and they felt like they already earned that win, when in reality they certainly didn't, and Georgia State was ready to play. So that was a bad way of explaining. I just feel like the issues that we talked a little bit about that didn't pop up against Virginia Tech in Alcorn might have started to pop up that week and then affected them against Georgia State, just in terms of NIL, portal, chemistry. I think they're still working through some of that.
I was thinking this week, two friends of mine, Tyler Siskey and Neil McCready, have a really good podcast, the McCready and Siskey podcast. Tyler was a guy that was a recruiting coordinator at Alabama and at Ole Miss, and I think also at South Alabama. He now runs like a consulting recruiting agency, and he's got contacts all over the country. And they're fascinating to listen to because they give you a lot of very unfiltered stuff on how the world of college athletics works now. And because of his connections to coaches, he's always getting the lowdown on, well, you won't believe what happened today and how it is to deal with. And I heard Tyler say this once, and it's kind of stuck with me. And the backdrop of this is both the way that Clark, Lee, and Tim Corbin wanted to build their program. Tim's come under a lot of scrutiny for failure to adapt to the portal, and Clark has too. And you've seen a pivot to some regard for both those guys, particularly football. But Tyler said this a couple of weeks ago, and I think this is dead on. He said, recruiting now is speed dating. You don't have relationships like you did with kids that go back 2 or 3 years. You can't afford to even develop relationships with those kids because you've got to chase the hot thing in the portal. And these kids are hitting the portal a lot of times and making decisions within days. And it's just a bad situation. You've got to have guys like that win. But it's like asking somebody to marry you that you've dated a couple of times. You don't really know what's underneath the surface. It might work out, but you might be unleashed with a whole heap of stuff you don't know is coming because the dynamic of the game has changed. And look, it's not just Clark Lee dealing with that. It's everybody. But I think back to, margin of error, like Luke said, I just think that's a lot of stuff you got to consider and go through. And you always wonder, is this going to backfire on me later?
Yeah.
Billy, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a different era. And, I think for Vanderbilt, you look at it, a lot of people think they can't succeed in it. Well, they beat Virginia Tech. And so I think for this season, what this team can do. At this point, they've got to go out there and continue to do it. So, I mean, yeah. In terms of the, the player to coach relationships, we know it's changed. But, and if you don't want to coach in it, then you can get out, And so I think if you're in it, what you're in it for. So, and you haven't seen as much complaining from coaches, but they're figuring it out on the fly. So it's there's I'm sure that it's like basketball we've talked about. There's probably a lot of A lot of football coaches are here early in the season. Look at Florida State; they're 0-3. There's a lot. There's a lot of this going on around the country, and I do think a little bit of it caught up to Vanderbilt. We'll see how they respond from it.
Yeah, I still think the current college climate just favors the worst actors for the most part, and that's always a tough spot to be in. But yeah, baseball season presented by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. Partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide Purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee. They now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more information, visit their website at mpmci.com. Get your ice cream. You can never go wrong with ice cream. You need a lot of ice cream after a painful loss. It doesn't make it go away, but it makes it feel a little better. Let's rewind Saturday for a minute. Luke, what stood out to you?
Well, let's throw out all the intangibles that weren't there. I felt like from the very beginning, and again, how we have to win football games is not turn the football over and not get penalized a lot and stay within one score either way. We didn't do any of that Saturday. We start off the game, fumble the first series, give them a short field. Luckily, I only got a field goal out of it. Then we have a boneheaded play by a kid in the end zone that gives them 2 points. So we're doing all the things that we talk about all the time that we can't do. And that's what stood out to me was that. And the fact that, and, we talked about this, Chris and Billy, before we even played a snap this year, 2 of our top 3 corners are gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I texted you, Chris, when we were kind of saying a couple things toward the end of the game. I said, we're same problem, cornerback.
Yep.
Still got the same problem we had last year and the year before. Colby Taylor is an athlete, but he didn't play well at all Saturday. I'm just calling kids out because I don't have any, reason not to. I'll just say the truth.
Well, and you can do that in this era. I think that's another thing.
Yeah,
these kids
getting paid now.
I mean,
yeah,
I think you can rip that off, and I know you may not like doing it, Luke. I know a lot of people don't, but I think that's something that you can do.
And I felt like this too, and I may be wrong about this. I haven't talked to Clark about it or asked him about it. I felt like we weren't, a lot of times when they were getting ready to run a play, we're still moving around, talking to each other, not sure where to be and that type of thing. And that again comes from preparation. If you're not paying attention in the meeting rooms, you only have so much time on the field to practice, but you've got to do the time in the meeting rooms and on your own time, making sure you're doing your job. And they didn't do that. Not in any way. Even though the offense put up 32 points, I never felt like they played well all night. It kind of became a Diego to Eli just to save the game, so to speak.
And what a special teams disaster too. Steven Santaniola, a guy that has not been back there up until that point, and I wanted to ask Clark about this. Just why was he back there? He steps over, that lets the ball cross over there. I thought it was close, who knows? But again, it happened. And then you saw a pretty bad punt. I think it was just shanked from Mirko at some point that I think hurt them in the moment. But I want to give credit to Georgia State. I know no one wants to hear that at this point, but I thought Jim Chaney had a field day. I mean, he outcoached this Vanderbilt team. Jim Chaney and Christian Veyer, you got to have a quarterback in that offense that can read quickly and make throws. He found the soft spots in the zone all night. And they kept going to Fleming, the tight end. And I know Longwell finally picked one off there late, but I mean, they kept finding the soft spots in the zones. I did think, and I told Luke this before the pod, there were a few very costly penalties in this game for Vanderbilt. Linus Zunk's late hit, which I didn't think should have been called, was called. That kept the drive alive. CJ Taylor's targeting was huge. Again, that was a close. I understand why they called it. And now he missed the first half of Missouri. That costs you against Georgia State, and now it costs you the next week. The PI call on Nick Rinaldi, I thought was a bad call. I mean, I didn't even think he touched him. So that kept another drive alive. There were just penalties after penalties that I thought really really cost Vanderbilt. You mentioned it, Luke. The communication on defense, I didn't think was there. They didn't seem like they were in sync. Georgia State was the aggressor from the first snap. Vanderbilt was on the heels. Georgia State was the aggressor. After that strip sack, right away you knew, okay, Georgia State came here to play. Gunnar Hansen was on the right side on that play, playing right tackle. Again, I don't know if he's comfortable there, but they've been switching, so that's not an excuse for that. The trenches did not really show up. The defensive line, Georgia State averaged almost 6 yards per carry. Vanderbilt only averaged about 3, maybe 4. And that's, you're not going to win many games like that, especially on the road against a Sun Belt team. Referees, again, they weren't great, but Vanderbilt, you still got to find a way to win that game. Eli Stowers was probably the lone positive in this game. Glenn Seabrooks, too. Seabrooks, I thought, played really well, but without Stowers, you're not anywhere close to being in that game. And I think we realized how important he is to this team. So yeah, Chris, it's just, it was everything. It was every weakness of this team, I thought, combined into one game. And, they got to find a way to bounce back. But I thought there were some bright spots, especially for them to come back. They're late. Langston Patterson talked about it. He said he wasn't surprised by that. This team has fight. They've got heart, but they weren't in it mentally that week and ended up costing them.
Yeah, Luke mentioned the corners. That's something that's been on my mind. That they are down 2 guys that they thought would be big impact corners for them, and that's a spot where they still need help at a lot of spots. You go back and look at what they did in the offseason, guys. I feel like they did a good job at least trying to address things. I don't know that you can bring in a 5 stud offensive lineman if you're Vanderbilt, but they got 3 guys that are, I guess, now starting. Is that a good situation? It's not great, but it's better than it was. Quarterback, you certainly upgraded. Tight end, you absolutely upgraded with Stowers. Defensive line depth, and we did Sidner or Wood play last week? I'm trying to remember now.
Nope, Sidnor was out, and then Wood got hurt, and he's not playing this week either.
Yeah, two guys that have been a big part of what they've done. So if you want to look at it from a sunny side up, I feel like they did a lot of things they needed to do in the portal. And look, a lot of teams can say this too. Through injuries or whatever, but you have those 2 corners, and maybe things look a good bit different. Is there a chance they're sitting here at 3-0 this morning? Yeah, maybe so. No, to be fair, maybe Georgia State had some injuries too that affected them, and maybe they could say the same thing. But yeah, I thought that was a big part of it. There was something else too that you guys said that I wanted to reflect on, and it's
penalties.
Yeah, that's part of it. That wasn't it, but that's a good point. I do not understand how they getting called with some of these penalties. That's what it was, really. I'm not being critical of officials, and you've heard me say it on other platforms. You've heard me say it here. I hate the way the game is officiated. And I'm not blaming the officials who were just told to call a certain way and they do it, but the fact that CJ Taylor got kicked out for that was absurd. Absurd. And it happens. It's not happening just to Vanderbilt. Happened to Florida last week. You're seeing these games, some of these late hit calls and, this thing where you can't come down on the quarterback. I'm sorry. If you see something that is blatant and a guy's coming in, he's had his head down for 3 seconds and spears a guy in the ear hole. Yeah, kick a guy out for that. Some of this ticky-tack stuff that 15 years ago, nobody thought anything about. And I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to minimize the head injuries. They're trying to train guys into not doing this or that I get it, but we've hit a point where it's absurd.
Well, in the NFL, this might be a stupid question, but are the officials full-time?
NFL,
I know they are.
They are now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I think they didn't used to be. They're certainly not in college.
Right. Well, this is an NFL model, and if ever they've got iPads now, they've got in-helmet communication. These officials need to be full-time, at least in the Power 4 level, because I mean, look, these plays have impacted. You look at the SU South Carolina game, that impacted the game. That impacted so, and they need, the replay centers. Each conference, it's different for each conference. So I think that's the biggest thing, Chris. They've got to find a way to make a national standard for this, as opposed to here's what they do in the SEC, here's what they do in the Big Ten, though. Here's what they do in the Sun Belt. I mean, this is the NFL model, and it's another thing wrong with college football, just like everything else. And nothing's ever going to get fixed, and it's probably never going to be a day where we sit here and go, college football is perfect now, and this is it's kind of the beauty in the game of it. But I think a good first step in that would be making these officials full time, at least at the Power 4 level, because this is an NFL model now. I mean, players are being paid; these fans are putting all kinds of money into it. Why can't the NCAA put a little bit more money into it?
Guys, listen, look, and Chris, you made the point about you can't criticize the officials. You're not. I have no problem with the call being made on the field against CJ. What I have a problem is when they go up and review it.
Reviews.
That's the part. That's where common sense is going out the window.
Yes.
You can tell intent. You can tell intent on something like that. And you can tell that it wasn't egregious. You can tell there's a football play. And that's where I have. It's not necessarily the call on the field, because you can correct the call on the field most times. That's where it needs to improve.
Let's say we get into the national title game. And here's there is so much money going around, guys,
right?
To players, to gambling. I think that's always. I'm not saying it's impacting. I'm not saying it had anything to do with what happened Saturday anywhere. I'm just saying when you have that much money floating around a lot of places, there's a lot of influence issues. I'm just waiting for the day, and what, even if it's just an innocent mistake, right? What if you're in the national title game and you're Alabama and Ohio State or whoever, and you kick a guy out on the first drive for a targeting call like CJ Taylor had? You got no, if the replay doesn't do a good job of upholding, you got no backup plan. You've got no recourse to appeal it. And, you could see a game. It is getting super competitive at the top right now. There's, if you look at the computers, there's 6 or 7 teams in the country at the top within about a field goal of each other. I wonder about the potential of a call like that in a spot like that having an impact on who wins or loses the national title. And I guess that's always been part of the game. But when it's silly stuff that's, and the other one that drives me crazy, and I talked about this on my SEC channel. Did you guys watch South Carolina LSU?
I did.
Yep.
Kyron Lacey catches a ball late in that game. 2 feet in bounds, has full control of the ball. He then takes a couple steps out of bounds, and for just a split second, he's got the ball in one hand. It moved about that much. And they spent several minutes replaying that. Did he have, like, when we were kids, and even, not even kids, everybody knew what a catch was. We have now over-legislated that to the point of we're bringing absurd stuff into it that like we all used to know what a catch was. And now you look up in these games, I think South Carolina was 4 hours. That one, Vandy, Georgia State, was 3.5 hours. It's not even an ABC game where they're probably getting more commercials and whatever in their production. I just think that there's a lot of things that are going wrong with the way that college football is run. And I think it is, I'm not going to say it's ruining the game. There's a lot of people watching with interest, and there's some things I think are better than they've ever been in some ways. But I just, those are 2 things that really stood out to me on Saturday. So, yeah. Billy, I'll have you get the mailbag ready. You know what we need? We need a room full of people who can focus on the problem. And when you need focus, give Magic Mind a shot. The people at Magic Mind reach out to me this summer, asked me to sample their product. It is designed to help with focus, and guess what it does? It is a mental performance shot that keeps you clear and motivated and reduces stress. It has helped me gain a clear head and much-needed focus through some stressful and hectic days this spring and summer. It is not a coffee replacement. There are no quick fixes. It is an addition to your morning routine with time-release caffeine. If you like the scientific explanation for why it works, it is completely safe with 12 all-natural ingredients to support your body's energy engine. It's got mushroom nootropics and adaptogens, plus over 100% of your daily vitamin C and D in every bottle. It has been doctor validated with over 200 scientific studies behind every ingredient. Magic Mind donates 5 cents of every bottle sold to mental health charities that help U.S. homeless communities. Magic Mind is so confident it can help you. It will refund your money 100%, no questions asked if you don't like it. Try Magic Mind. You can get a special discount as a Vandy Sports podcast listener, 48% off a subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with the code Vandy Sports 20. Go to magicmind/Vandy Sports. Magicmind.com/Vandy Sports. We'll put that in the episode notes. Anyway, help out the folks who help our show. Magic Mind is where Flow State awaits you. Billy, what awaits us in the mailbag?
All right, we're going to start with Pepperdor. What do you make of Clark's explanation on his defensive approach on that final drive? How much was right play, bad luck, or elite offense versus how much was bad play calling? I'll say this. Clark did say yesterday, he was actually on with us on the Plaster Show. He did say at certain points in that game, I overcalled. I did too much in that game. And I think he at some point realized, I don't know when it was, maybe it was after the game, that the best call was the simple call where there's not a lot going on. So he did admit to that this week. But, you know, they were too open on that. I mean, the play where they complete about 15, 20 yards, Veyer throws to the right side, they get out of bounds quick. That can't be that easy. They found the tight end again. I thought Randon was there in coverage. Great catch. And a lot of this is you have to give credit to Veyer. I mean, that throw to Hurst was a dot. I mean, that had to have that. I mean, he maybe does that. He maybe does that again. I don't know, 4 out of 10 times. Like that had to have been perfect. Hurst he was this close to stepping out of bounds. Now he would have been down at the 1 yard line. But they went to man there late, and that didn't work. And Dante Carter was the safety there. He didn't step over at all to that side. But you're playing one safety. I've heard some questions about that. Obviously, Clark is responsible for this, but I do think you got to give credit to Chaney, Veyer, and that Georgia State offense for executing. Clark said, this is a good point. I thought he said Veyer outplayed us. I mean, he made the right throws. He made the right decisions. So, Luke, it's just one of those deals. And now it's tough, I know, for fans because that happened in 2021 against South Carolina, happened last year against UNLV. Clark deflected that after the game and said, this team is different. Well, we need to go out there and see it. And it wasn't any different against Georgia State.
Well, the South Carolina game, let's go back to that if you want to do that. That kid, here's the difference. You had a good quarterback at Georgia State. This kid that did it against the South Carolina was a walk-on or a manager or something. That was a third string or fourth string quarterback. And we played prevent. We rushed 3. The other day we rushed 4. We played some zone. We played some man. We didn't do any of it well.
Yeah.
And like you said, VR made a great throw there at the end. The problem that I have, or if I'm going to be critical of Clark and the team, it would be how we managed the clock there. I felt like when we were getting ready to take the lead, and I understand you take the lead when you can take the lead, but there could have been 15 to 20 seconds more off of the clock. Would it have still saved them from scoring? I don't know. Maybe they call different plays. But that would be my criticism, not the fact that they scored, because you can look back to Virginia Tech, who had the ball at the 25 with a chance to tie or win the game against us, and we stopped them. So it's all about making plays, all about doing your job, and we didn't do any of it.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and review the clock. I haven't had a chance to rewatch it yet, but the first thing that when they scored that last touchdown, Vanderbilt, I looked to my son. I said, I think they might have scored too soon. I think that's the part. I mean, coverage things, hey, the same thing that works, you're a genius, and then it doesn't work and you're an idiot. And so I think as I've gotten older, I don't really dive into the weeds of some of that stuff as much as I used to. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure there are times I miss obvious things, but to me, look, if they just cover the guy, if if a corner handles his guy, and give credit to Georgia State for making great throws and the receivers for getting open and make catches. But, end of the day, a guy does his job. We're not having this discussion. They shouldn't have gone down the field in 5 plays and gotten 75 yards. And again, I mean, you can say what you want about coaching, but Clark did say, hey, we change up our approach a little bit. We played some zone, we played some man. So the excuse that they were predictable, I don't think is one that probably washes. But at the same time, though, and I said this in my post-game write-up, I said, hey, this is a head coach who came in the spring, and he had to pick up where somebody else left off. So if it's tough at Vanderbilt, it's really tough at Georgia State, where your head coach leaves for an assistant's job at South Carolina, not even a coordinator's job, an assistant's job at South Carolina. And you got to pick up the pieces at a place like Georgia State. Now, I think they can get in probably anything, that a lot of things that you can at Vanderbilt through school. I'll just leave it at that. And that helps. But bottom line, you can give reasons. They shouldn't have lost that game. You're Vanderbilt. You had a head start on them building your program. We can dissect the why, but they shouldn't have, whatever reason you have.
Go Doors 94. Did we get out schemed by Georgia State? I don't think so. Obviously, there were plays and times in the game where I thought Chaney and that offense schemed really well. But I genuinely think you've got it. There are times where you've got to give credit to Veyer. Ted Hurst, I think, is an SEC level receiver. I mean, he went up and made a contested catch against Colby Taylor late in that game. Yeah. And then, he goes up and makes another one to win the game. So they made plays. They went out there and outplayed Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt shot themselves in the foot. We know that. We talked about the safety. That was 2 points. The early turnover there, the penalties cost them points. So they shot themselves in the foot, but I also think Georgia State came ready to play and Vanderbilt didn't. So I don't think, Luke, it was much of an out scheme. There were definitely plays and times in the games where, man, what they're doing is really working right now. But I don't think they really did anything defensively out of the ordinary that Vanderbilt hadn't seen. And offensively, I mean, he was getting it out quick and Vanderbilt couldn't get pressure. So I don't think it was a scheme thing. I think they got outplayed.
I'll be short and sweet about this. They played their A game both physically and mentally, and we played our D game both physically and mentally.
You can slice it however you want, but I'll put it this way. I think we'll all agree. Whether you call it scheme or execution or whatever, they did a better job, did Georgia State, of finding one-on-one matchups that worked. Several of the touchdown passes were that way. Pavia a couple times went long. I remember he made a really good throw, I think, to Skinner in the end zone, and their DB jumped in at the last minute, batted it away with the hand. And again, I look at it, maybe you can pull it. Their receivers got more separation. How much of that is Georgia State's got better receivers than Vanderbilt? I think that's probably some of it. Does Georgia State have better defensive backs than Vanderbilt? Maybe. I don't know. But that's one thing I did notice. You could put whatever label on it you want, but those one-on-one matchups that Georgia State won were probably the key why they came out ahead. Quick reminder, mailbag sponsored by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call, 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Hope you never need a personal injury attorney, but if you do, they are the longest-running sponsor of the show. Guest line also presented by John Levin, good friend of the show. Wobble Bond Dickinson is his company. He thanks the student-athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Guest line also presented by Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. Billy, what do we got next?
All right, Section M19. How does this team bounce back from this loss? Feels like the story is already written. Well, you still got 9 games left in the season. How you bounce back is you lean on your leadership. Who are the leaders of this team? I think obviously Diego Pavia, he's a captain. CJ Taylor, who won't be playing in the first half. Hoskins is a captain as well. Defensively, Marlon Sewell, who obviously will have to play a lot more. this is where your leaders have to step in and lead the way, lead the charge. But we hear all the time about great teams. Your best players are also your best leaders. Pavia and Stowers to me is a duo that I think has to step in and say, guys, we're not letting that happen again. We have to bounce back here. We have to bounce back and play well. I think they will, Luke. I really do. I don't think the story is already written on this team. Now, doesn't take away from how bad of a loss that was, but how they bounce back, the leaders step up. I mean, that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent. I would say this: 2 years ago, we were in the same situation, and we won a couple of games late against Florida and Kentucky to finish the season 5-7. It's either going to be that, or will we do like we did last year and lose 8 in a row? I don't think that for one instant will happen, because there's different type of kids on this team. Some more, with the transfers, and some of these kids, they're not used to what people call the Vanderbilt way or whatever. That crap's over with. Now, if you as a staff can't keep this team healthy and keep this team ready to play, and there again, that some of that obviously falls on the strength coach in the training room, but it also falls on the head coach to make sure that we don't have another week. And it wasn't just the game, it was the week. Let's be clear. It was the week that we lost that game, how we prepared both mentally and physically last week. They got to quit that. That can't happen again like when we play Ball State. You can't.
Yeah, and Clark Lee put it out there in front of us on Tuesday. And you would hope, and I don't know if this has happened or has not happened, but you would hope that there was a player-led effort at some point, whether the individual position meetings or somebody calling a team meeting saying, hey, look, coach is right. We got to be focused. We got to show up, and we paid the price. If we want to have the season we think we can have, these are things that can't happen again.
All right, J2M, 2 hallmarks of the Clark Lee era continue to be problems. In-game decisions such as clock management and the inability of the secondary to stop the deep throws. Why are these areas continually issues for this team? I don't think in-game decisions and clock management are, through 3 games, are as big of issues as they have been through the first 3 years. I really thought against Virginia Tech, they did a good job. They managed that game well. I think you got to give credit to Kill and Beck and that offensive staff of having that offense ready to go, and they ended up shocking Virginia Tech. Now, I do think, as you mentioned, Luke, the clock management popped up a little bit late in this game where, okay, maybe, I'm not blaming this on that, but I do think, like you said, Chris, maybe you could have ran the ball out a little bit more, and maybe there's 40 seconds on the clock instead of a little over a minute for Georgia State. But the area of the deep throws, for the secondary, now they have 2 corners that are out. That's obviously brutal. I mean, that's no team needs that, especially when those guys were announced to be out. But Colby Taylor was a guy that was brought in to improve that group. He didn't play well Saturday night. Tyson Russell got beat for a touchdown. I mean, in a little bit of that play was on DeRicky Wright, I think, as well. DeRicky Wright has struggled in coverage a little bit. Those guys have to step up. Now, are they who they are? Maybe. Maybe that's the issue. But Adante Carter is going to have to step in and step up. We've talked about Jalen Lackey. Where is he? He's going to have to play. So, I think the bigger issue there isn't necessarily clock management, Luke. I think the secondary and still their inability to just make plays when they need to make them.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's about making plays. If you're put in a position, if you're in man coverage, you know what your job is. If you're in zone, you know what your area is. It's doing your job. I mean, when the play is called, you do what you're supposed to do. Do your job. And it's easy to blame it on the coach when the player doesn't do his job. I don't know. You can blame it 50-50, I guess. I don't know. But I don't think that has anything to do with anything. It's game by game is different. Look at Virginia Tech and then look at Saturday.
I'll hit the question a little differently. And again, I think if you're mismanaging clock and something, that's inexcusable. But what I see when I watch them this year, guys, is a team defensively. Well, offensively, we know how improved they are, and we've kind of gone over that. Defensively, what I see is a team that's pretty good about swarming the ball and staying in their lanes and everything. That wasn't the case last year, where guys would just run through wide swaths of open field, and guys, weren't in position to make tackles. I feel like Clark Lee has done a really good job in solving that issue. Now, can they get more physical up front? Of course, there's a lot of things that need to be solved with recruiting, but I see some strategy that's worked there. Where I see them having issues, well, we saw the bus play against Virginia Tech, and that was a corner making a decision on his own that cost him. But I think where they got Saturday, to me, and maybe there's something you could have done differently in scheme. Maybe you should have blitzed a guy, because I feel like that really helped them against Virginia Tech. But bottom line, with the strategy they played, they got beat one-on-one matchups. That still points to recruiting and talent. And we did say, hey, they knew that was an issue. They tried to address it. They caught 2 horrible breaks with 2 corners to be playing a lot. But to me, I do see improvement in coaching, but when you get beat one-on-one by a group of 5 team, now granted, one that when you're Atlanta, you recruit from a base of talented athletes, and so I think some of those Georgia State kids would be scoring touchdowns against some other SEC teams too.
Yep.
Bottom line is, you still can't get beat if you're Vanderbilt. Your margin of error is not that big, and we saw that on display Saturday.
Frida's boss, how are we looking on the injury front? Seems like we had several starters out or get hurt against Georgia State. Yeah, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Zaylen Wood is out from Missouri. He was hurt against Georgia State. BJ Diakite will be out from Missouri. Obviously, CJ Taylor's not an injury, but he'll be out for the first half. Eli Stowers and Cole Spence are listed as questionable. I think Stowers was banged up a little bit in that game, but I think he's going to give it a go. Corday Sidner is also questionable. They need him to go, in this game, if he'll help a good bit. But Luke, without Sidner and Wood, I think we saw, especially in that second half, the defensive line just, it didn't seem like there was much hope of getting pressure with 4.
Well, this weekend, if Brady Cook's able to sit back there in a rocking chair, he'll pick us apart. He'll do that they're number 6 or 7 in the nation for a reason. And we have to bring pressure, whether it's extra folks. But against a guy like Brady Cook, sometimes it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. And our injuries and so forth, they're no excuse. We got to play through them. I do think it's important that we at least get Sidner back for at least a half to where we put some pressure. I want to say one thing about a kid on this team that I think hadn't got enough credit is Linus Zunk. His improvement from last year to this year is awesome. He's done a great job in the weight.
Absolutely.
And for a kid who hadn't played a whole lot of football, he's one we better watch out for, people trying to cherry pick.
Yeah, it feels like the injuries have kind of sneakily racked up. I didn't really realize it till you started naming some names there. I mean, Cole Spence has not been well, and you didn't mention maybe the most important one. Diego Pavia, Joey said, was kind of hobbled in warmups, played through it. So yeah, Luke, you said something else I wanted to touch on. It's escaped me. I'll think of it later, maybe.
Bryson Coleman is also questionable, listed as questionable. I doubt he'll play against Missouri, but getting him back, I think could potentially help that offense. G-Barks 24, and this is, I think, a good question to think about. Does Colby Taylor get the Burden matchup? Luther Burden has seemed to get under Drinkwitz's skin in a couple sideline outbursts lately, and maybe Colby Taylor could play the role of pest during Saturday's game. I think this is why you brought Colby Taylor. He's 6'3", he's long, he's physical, he'll get up in your face. I know he struggled Saturday night in coverage, and maybe he's not the best cover corner Vanderbilt's ever had, but we know how much he talks. Now, you can't go overboard with it, but I think early on, getting in his face a little bit, and obviously you've got to contain this, especially with Colby Taylor, but if you can just annoy Luther Burden at the very least, maybe that gets under his skin. Maybe you cause a penalty after a play that affects Missouri. I could see that playing into this game, Luke. Now, you've got to be careful with that if you're Clark and talking to Colby about this. But he's got to play better, bottom line. I do think he'll be matched up with Burden. I think Brandon Fontenette is a guy they'll probably put on Burden at times too, Luke, just because of how good that kid is. But you've also got Theo Weiss and Mookie Cooper and other guys. So even if you're locking down Burden or even double teaming him, you've got other receivers that can beat you as well.
I will say this, and being around receivers and corners in practice a lot, I'll take Jordan Matthews, for example. If you got a corner that's talking a lot of smack, Jordan played even better. So I think that can backfire on you as well. If Kobe Taylor gets in his face and starts trying to irritate him, he may have a career day against us. I'd rather have Martell Height on him a lot. I think Martell's up with him well. And I do think this, though. It's the pass rush thing, too. We forget about that. We always talk about our corners, and I've been critical of our corners. But we've got to get more pressure on the quarterback, especially a guy like Brady Cook.
Bill, I think you brought up an interesting point, but here's the thing. Colby Taylor's had problems with discipline and running his mouth, and of course got, de facto suspended for a game and a half. I don't think you put a kid in that position who's already struggled with it. If you're going to say, all right, we've gotten this behind us, don't even try it. I know what I was thinking though a minute ago. Some things you said remind me. I've watched Missouri play. One thing that I think does match up potentially in Vanderbilt's favor, they do a lot of short screens and bubble screens and stuff like that. I think Vanderbilt's done a really good job of, again, not leaving big areas of the field open. When a guy catches the ball, there's 2 or 3 guys there. And I feel like their tackling has been pretty good this year. They bring a guy down kind of when they're supposed to, which has been an issue in the past. And I'm going to have to give some credit to strength and conditioning probably for that improvement there. So I think that's what Missouri likes to do a lot, but they will take shots downfield. And when I've seen them so far, Brady Cook has just been a little bit off. But you had better be better than you were last week if you're Vanderbilt, because when they are going deep, the guys they got are better than the ones you faced last week, and you'd better be ready for that, especially Luther Burden.
All right, Vandy Fan 23. Would the defense perform better if Clark Lee tried coaching from the booth? Would it even be possible for a head coach to do this?
No.
Gus Miles the booth before.
So is that possible?
Has
a head coach ever done that?
Yeah, he had a broken leg or foot or something, and so he had to coach from the press box.
Are you talking Hugh Freeze?
No, it's Gus Malzahn, wasn't it?
Okay.
Gus, when he was
Derek Dooley even coached from the sideline when he had his walker and stuff. Come on. The Hugh Freeze one is the one I'm laughing about. I was thinking that too, Billy, about Hugh Freeze sitting in the hospital and giving the thumbs up. And I don't think he was coaching that game, but I wish he had been.
Man. That's a good question, but no, Clark will not be coaching from the booth. I can tell you that. Last one here, Knoxville Door 94. What are the chances of an SEC win this season? I think they're going to get one. I think they beat one of either South Carolina, Kentucky, or Auburn. Missouri and LSU, I think, are outside chances, but those are both on the road. You're going to Tiger Stadium at night. That could be a game. Maybe LSU is down in the dumps a little bit, but I do think they get an SEC win. So, Luke, I think chances are high.
Yeah, and I'll stick with my win. They win between 4 and 6. They just made it a little bit harder by doing what they did Saturday.
I'm going to give you chances for SEC wins in order, and you tell me if I've easiest to hardest, and you tell me if you got a disagreement. I'm going to go at Auburn, number 1, at Kentucky, number 2, South Carolina, 3. I think you could debate the order of that, especially South Carolina being here. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Auburn's beatable. They've got a freshman quarterback now who's actually from Nashville. Vanderbilt, I think, has an advantage with him. They got a couple guys that played with him in high school, Longwell and Sherrill as well. But yeah, so I would rank Auburn 1. I might switch those two, Chris. That's a tough one though, because South Carolina's at home. But what's the advantage? I mean, the crowd, it's going to probably feel like a road game anyway. So I do think Kentucky's defense is really good. So is South Carolina's. So I don't know. Those are kind of, you can flip flop those, Luke, if you want. But I do think Auburn, and maybe not close, I think is the win, the potential win for Vanderbilt.
Well, I'll stick with the three you mentioned early, Billy, but I'd much rather have. Can we swap Florida, Mississippi State, and Arkansas for Texas, Alabama, and Missouri?
You know, Vanderbilt, a lot like Oklahoma,
yeah.
got screwed with their schedule. You look at it, Tennessee gets to play Arkansas and Mississippi State both. And, you know, some years, you know, these schedules were made. I don't know when these schedules were made. Vanderbilt obviously got the raw end of the stick here. But, man, if this was a year where they played Florida or even Mississippi State, who lost to Toledo,
Yeah.
you know, or Arkansas. I mean, this is not a great bottom of the SEC this year. I mean, Chris, you've got 5-6 teams that are, you know, milling around at the bottom trying to fight for respectability. So
I would pick them right now to beat either Mississippi State or Florida, but unfortunately, as you said, they're not on the schedule. I would, after thinking about it, I think I would go at Auburn, South Carolina, at Kentucky. And part of the Auburn situation, that's November the 2nd. They have got, between now and then, they've got Arkansas this weekend, which they are favored in. I think they're losing that one. They got Oklahoma next weekend and Auburn. I think they got a shot to lose that one. At Georgia, they're losing that one. At Missouri, they're losing that one. At Kentucky, I think they're losing that one. And then they got Vandy. Now, what happens at Auburn when things go bad? They go really bad. I think that's one of those places that collapses under its own weight. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I can see a definite path for that to happen. And oh, by the way, your offensive coaching staff went down there and got a win last year. I think my number 4 game, moving on, I think at LSU. Now, I think that the chances of LSU, and that people like you're crazy, but hear me out on this one. The chances, I think, of LSU being winnable went down by a lot last week. Now, if they'd gotten beaten by South Carolina, which they should have gotten beaten, but they didn't. And you've got to run before that. Ole Miss, at Arkansas, at A&M, Alabama, and then at Florida. But I think there's been a lot of, if Brian Kelly doesn't win at least 8 games, he's getting fired talk. They lost last week. They'd be 1-2 heading into UCLA game this week with potential losses. Ole Miss, at Arkansas, at A&M, Alabama. The where that game is to me is if it is melting down by that point, and look, that presumes Vanderbilt's still engaged. Who knows? You could see Vanderbilt, the season fall apart. They kind of mail it in like they did last year. But I don't. That's number 4 to me, and then you've got who's left? We've got Alabama here, Texas here, Tennessee here. Yeah, that's none of those are happening. And who am I leaving out?
Missouri.
I would put Missouri. Missouri's probably the 5th easiest chance for a win out of those 8.
Let me ask
I don't
one
see
more
any way
thing.
they beat Alabama, Tennessee, or Texas.
Yeah, let me ask this. Last week, you know, Boston College almost beat them. That was a competitive game. Castellanos and Bill O'Brien had Missouri flustered a little bit. Now Tigers pulled away and Burden, you know, did his thing. But does that give you any hope, Luke, for Vanderbilt this week? And how comparable is Pavia to Castellanos and what he was able to do? Because, you know, Castellanos probably might be the better athlete, but, you know, Pavia's done some things like that before as well and can really improvise like we know. So did that Boston College result in watching that? I don't know if you watched it. Did that give you any hope?
Yeah. Guys, just by the end of the first quarter, I'll be able to tell you whether we're going to have a chance, because it's going to be the line of scrimmage. If we can hold our own up front, we can beat Missouri. Absolutely, we can beat Missouri. But if we don't hold our own up front, we're not getting any pass rush, it could get ugly. So, you know, and one other thing I want to add, Chris, about all these predictions. Let's say Nico gets hurt for Tennessee. Let's say LSU, Nussmeier's done for LSU. Let's say LSU, when we play them, has 4 losses. how engaged are they going to be? We talk about how engaged we'll be. It works both ways. So, too early to tell, guys. We got 9 games to go. It's fun to predict and all that, but I am not as down, I guess, as most Vanderbilt fans would be because we lost to Georgia State. I'm a little frustrated by it because it was unnecessary. Didn't have to happen. But I just feel like that after Saturday, we'll know a whole lot more. And I'm excited about having an off week either way, how it goes this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you best case scenario for beating Missouri. They can't hit the deep balls. Vanderbilt covers the short stuff pretty well. Vanderbilt's had a history playing that game pretty close. Last time they went there, they lost by what, a field goal or whatever it was. It was 1 score. Now, no, look, that was not the Missouri team that was the Missouri team last year, which got better as the season went along, by the way. And that's not the Missouri team. I think this Missouri team is a lot better than that one. But for some reason, you saw it with Georgia and Kentucky. Some teams just match up pretty well against other teams for whatever reason. And that might be the case here. Here's the other thing. And now Vanderbilt's got to take care of its part. Okay, you got to play more discipline. It's been 3 weeks in a row. Penalties have been a problem. We what we think of some of those penalties, but that's the reality you're playing with. Missouri's had issues too. They had a series last week where Luther Burden got 2 personal foul penalties, and they had like a 2nd and 50 or something like that. And, Eli Drinkwitz can say till he's blue in the face, hey, we got to take these guys seriously. But it's A, it's Vanderbilt. B, they got beat on the road last week by Georgia State. So nature of kids is maybe not to always take things seriously. I think that is your best case effort. Vanderbilt goes into this, no pressure. Nobody expects them to win the game, and probably a little upset over what happened last week. I'm not saying that's how it's going to play out, but if you want a recipe, there are some things in there that you can look at and say, there's a way that this is maybe more interesting than a 21-point line would suggest.
You know what gives me game is because they don't have a kid named Schrader in the backfield.
Yep. Although they got 3 pretty good ones. They're not Schrader, but they do have good running backs.
They do, but Schrader was one of those kids that just doesn't allow you to lose.
Yeah.
He was one of my favorite players to ever watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, led the league last year in rushing. I look at their defense. Their defense is not anywhere close to what they were last year. That was a really good front from Missouri last year. They lost 8 key players from last year's defense. Oh, and they also lost their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker. I'm not saying this defense has been awful this year, but they've given up some big plays. Go watch last week against Boston College, and that's Boston College, right? And they played Murray State, they played Buffalo, they shut them out. But it's still early in this season. Missouri's, I think, still trying to figure out that defense, and their cover corners, I think, haven't been great. And I'm really looking at 1 week last week, so I think there will be chances for Vanderbilt to complete passes down the field, and they've got to do that. But can they run the football? Vanderbilt's offensive line, I'm not going to sit here and say they were awful because I did rewatch. I don't think they were as bad as I thought initially, but they've still got to be better in the run game. And Pavia's got to be able to do what he can do, like we know. So he gives them a chance. Vanderbilt's going to have to play a lot better, and they've got to be laser focused. But guys, I think Vanderbilt's comfortable in a week like this where no one's talking about them. No one thinks they're going to win this game. They're coming off a game where they looked awful, quite frankly. They weren't focused there. So they've got everything behind them. So I think this is where they're comfortable. Again, not picking Vanderbilt to win, but I think this game could be closer than a lot of people think.
Yeah, and one other thing in that Boston College game last week, they gave a big play. There was a fumble, like a missed exchange in the backfield that the quarterback picked up and ran with, and a couple DBs and guys bid on that and left the tight end wide open down the field. So again, if Missouri's a little bit undisciplined and Vanderbilt plays its A game in terms of discipline, which you haven't seen yet, there's and again that is a very one-sided scenario that I have presented. And I'm not saying it's going to play out like that, but if you want to know how it happens, there you go.
That's what we got.
All right. We'll be back at it next week. We'll have all kinds of coverage at Vandy Sports. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Luke and Billy. I'm Chris Lee. You've been watching the Vandy Sports Podcast.